Morning. Welcome to New Hope. Welcome to summer in Calgary. Awful. I've hated this summer. I was so glad we went to Italy in May and Kelowna 2 weeks ago, but good to be here this morning. Today we are going to talk about the parable of the fear of public speaking. What is God saying to us about who we are and about who He is through this very common fear, this phobia that seems to plague our culture? So that's the parable this morning, along with a few texts from the Old Testament and New Testament as well. I think it was grade 3 in Mrs. Kirk's class at the John Knox Christian School in Mississauga, Ontario, where I first realized how absolutely petrified I was to speak out loud in front of other people. Sitting at a desk like that near the window, Mrs. Kirk had assigned a group reading like you did back in grade school. Everybody read a paragraph or a sentence or a verse if you were reading the Bible. And I remember when she first assigned one, and I said, hold on, nobody told us we were going to do this. And I felt stuck in my desk. I didn't know what to do. And it started over in that corner of the class. And they went one verse, one verse, one verse, one verse. And so when it was about 7 or 8 away, I counted how many people were ahead of me and went to the verse that I had to read and just went over it and over it and over it and over it. Absolutely petrified that I would have to say these few words, these couple of sentences in front of my classmates. And inevitably, the crazy girl in front of me would read 2 verses in a row, and I would be stuck, ad-libbing, paralyzed with fear to speak publicly. By the time I got to high school, thankfully, the problem was resolving itself. Any time in English when there would be any chance of doing public reading or any class where there was a presentation, I skipped the class. So in grade 11, I got 51% in English, 53 in grade 12, and grade 13 in Ontario were a little slower, 56% in my English marks. There's no way I was going to speak or read out loud in school. And then you get to university where I was paying for my own, and there's no way I'm not going to get grades because I'm afraid to speak. So another solution for me, which worked very well, was drinking Maalox, that white liquid that I had it usually beside my shifter in the car. So on the way to school, I would just drink a half a bottle of it before speaking. And then, 15 years ago, I get a call to enter into the ministry and full-time, for a living, become a public speaker, a preacher, and have discovered that the greatest joy of my life, again and again and again, is to stand in this kind of context, representing that kind of context, and speak. This is, I feel at times, why you made me, God, was to have a voice in these kinds of contexts. How in the world does that kind of transition around this topic happen? Answering it this week very clearly, it's because you changed, John. You, more precisely, you found out who you were. You met God in a moment, hearing a word, and it changed you, and you discovered who you were. And in discovering who you were, you discovered your voice. Now I'm going to stop talking about myself in third person. I discovered I had a voice. Last week, I was reading from the Gospel of Matthew in the translation of the Bible called The Message. And just for my own reading, and then all of a sudden this verse, a few verses, struck me in the context of what we're talking about this morning. In Matthew chapter 10, he is calling his disciples to go out and be his hands, his feet, and his mouthpiece to the broader world. And in that chapter, I think verse 8, Jesus says, introducing what it's going to be like, he says, "You've been treated generously, so live generously." And as soon as I read that, I went, yeah, you've been treated generously by me. God has treated you generously. So be generous. God has spoken to you richly. So speak richly. God has given to you. So give with all of your life, including your mouth. And I mean, this is coming from Jesus, who in other parts of the Gospels, people said, such authority. We've never heard anyone speak like this before. And so that expert speaker says this word and more. Later on in the chapter, he says, "Don't be naive. Some people will impugn your motives. Others will smear your reputation just because you believe in me. Don't be upset when they haul you before the civil authorities. Without knowing it, they've done you and me a favor. Given you a platform for preaching the kingdom news. And don't worry about what you'll say or how you'll say it. Don't worry about what you'll say or how you'll say it. The right words will be there. The Spirit of your Father will supply the words." And then he goes on to talk more about the pushback and, again, telling them to hang in. Verse 40. "When people realize it's the living God that you're presenting and not some idol that makes them feel good, they're going to turn on you, even people in your own family. There's a great irony here, proclaiming so much love and experiencing so much hate. But don't quit. Don't cave in. It's all well worth it in the end. Don't be intimidated. Don't hesitate to go public. Don't be bluffed into silence by the threats of bullies. There's nothing they can do to your soul, your core being. Save your fear for God, who holds your entire life, body and soul, in his hands." Reading that through the mental lens of public speaking, I go, he sounds like a public speaking coach trying to instill confidence in those who are going out to speak. He's honestly addressing the anxieties in going public, naming them, not fooling them into thinking those things aren't going to happen. He's reframing their fears, giving them a new lens to understand who their audience is. And he's telling them, worry about that audience, worry about what God thinks, who holds your entire life, body and soul, your eternal life in his hands. Worry about what he thinks only. And for the rest of them, just imagine they don't have any clothes on. Which is quite helpful. What will people think of me? That's it, right? That's a huge paralyzing force when it comes to speaking in public. What will they think? To this fear, Jesus says, speak to an audience of one. One who is so for you and your voice, and so graciously cares that you're okay and that you feel confident in being you, who spoke words and words and words throughout millennia, saying what he feels about his people and about human beings and about the tongues that he made. Speak to that audience. Feel the freedom of a perfect parent, the greatest teacher you had, and what she or he made you feel about who you were and what your voice meant. Know that that is the one, really the only one, ultimately, before whom you speak.